Thanks so much, Ritika. July 4th was a bit different this year in Washington, with a presidential address from the Lincoln Memorial and flyovers from all the military services, leading up to it. Democrats and Republicans squared off on whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. What do we say now that it's all over? Well, we welcome back now to answer that question Bloomberg, our political panel of Dr. Basil Smikle. He is Democratic strategist and distinguished lecturer of politics and public policy at City University of New York. And from Washington, Jen Kearns, Republican strategist and former spokeswoman for the California Republican Party. So, Jen, as I understand it, you were there. You actually experienced it. What did you see?
Well, David, you know, I take the old Hewlett-Packard approach of management by walking around. I wanted to see it with my own two eyes, and I did, especially in light of a couple of other networks pretty much marketing this as if this were like Tiananmen Square happening in Washington, D.C. So I saw it myself, and what I saw was a very tastefully done display of patriotism. I saw young families out there. I saw people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, young people out at this celebration. I saw young military guys and their girlfriends. It was the best display of America that I've seen. And look, President Trump took a lot of critique over this, and I'm not exactly sure why. If you look at the flyovers, this is something that's done at the Super Bowl every year. This is something that's done at, you know, college football championship games. I think it was a lot to do about nothing. I think the Democrats look a little bit silly today.
Well, there's not a lot of controversy, I think, left over this. Is there, Basil? I mean, really?
Not really. You know, I'll be a little balanced here and just say, look, I understand to some extent that seeing tanks roll down the streets of Washington, D.C. could be very jarring for some because we're not used to that. Yeah. You know, President Trump went to Europe and saw some of the parades and the festivities, and he was impressed by that. Strongmen do it in their nations. So I think there was a lot of question about, was this really for the people or was it really for him? His language at the event wasn't as partisan as some had thought it might be, but I still think it's out of the ordinary. But you know what? I'm not going to sit here and spend a lot of time.
And really, Jen, I dare say this morning, what's more important is jobs. And 224,000 jobs is a big number. It surprised everybody. At the same time, the president immediately came out and criticized the Fed because they're not cutting rates. Does that make any sense? I mean, how many more jobs do you think he's going to create if they cut Fed rates?
Well, Donald Trump and the Fed, it's kind of like one of those like dating shows with the tension and the drama and the buildup. I think President Trump just loves treating people as if they're in that boardroom of The Apprentice. But look, the jobs numbers are impressive. This is a president who campaigned on the issue of jobs, 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 and boy, is he delivering. As you said, 224,000 jobs in the month of June, in the middle of summer. I mean, that is an impressive figure. And there was something for everyone in this jobs report. Now, I always look at the swing voter, females, minorities, and what really is in it for them. And there was a lot in it for everybody. You look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has talked about the hourly wage worker. Well, their wages were up about 3% over last year. The last time that happened was in April of 2009 when Barack Obama first took over. So President Trump at this point is doing better with hourly wage workers than Barack Obama was. That's pretty significant, and that's going to come into play in the 2020 elections.
Basil, these were good numbers. You just can't deny that. If this keeps up, can any Democrat really get purchase against Donald Trump?
Sure. I go back to when mayors report good crime numbers. It's one thing to report great stats, but do people feel safe? Same issue with the economy. The numbers and the metrics may tell one story, but if you have 40% of Americans feeling that they're still struggling and over 70% still living check to check, the question is, how do they feel about these job numbers? Do they feel like they're really taking a part of it? I'm not to say that the economy hasn't improved. It has improved under Barack Obama, and Donald Trump has certainly inherited that. So it's going to be incumbent upon Democrats to create this strong narrative about affordability and not just jobs, not just overall economy, but affordability, which I think hits home more for them.
Go ahead, Jen.
There's a reason James Carville said it's the economy, stupid, quote unquote, and that is because when you have strong economic numbers, people do feel it. So case in point, in the case of the hourly workers, they they, over the past year, have had $900 extra in their pocket. That is significant. That's the ability to put braces on your kids' teeth, to get your kid hockey equipment, to pay off maybe some credit card debt. That is significant to Americans. And look, it cuts against that claim of Nancy Pelosi, where she said, oh, this Americans Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is just crumbs. It's just giving crumbs to the rest of the people. We see now that that's actually not true. It has had a trickle-down effect here, and I think people are going to feel that for 2020.
Well, I would tell you, as a kid that used to have braces, yes, I would appreciate that too. But I would also argue that if you also include things like healthcare and college affordability, which we're talking a lot about, and housing. In Harlem, a studio at 620-something square feet just sold for $1 million. That's unrealistic for so many Americans. And so I think this issue, not just of the economic numbers, but of overall affordability. Can Americans afford the things that they want? And that's I think, the wedge for Democrats and where we sort of enter into this conversation.
So for both of you, this is where I get a little confused, because we get together and we talk about the economy and jobs and wages because we believe that that's what people ultimately really care about. Yeah. And yet it feels sometimes like neither party wants to focus on that. In the midterm elections, Jen, Donald Trump didn't run on the economy. He ran on things like immigration and Chinese trade and things like that. And in the debates, Basil, I mean, I don't hear talk about that at all. I hear about Medicare for all and free college tuition. What's going on, Jen? Why don't we actually focus on what we think people care about?
Well, look, people do care about the economy. We've seen that in the polling. They also care about things like health care, which I have to critique my own party. We're not doing a great job, not just on not working on it. There are proposals in the works in Congress, but we don't communicate that very well to people. So, I personally, over the next 15 months, am going to be looking to really get deeply into these conversations that Americans care about, that women care about, that swing voters care about, because I think you're right. This is really what matters. If you feel comfortable and if you feel that you can have a roof over your head and provide food for your kids, then your life gets exponentially better. President Trump is doing that, but we got to look to some of these other issues that could improve their lives.
And just very quickly, Oxford Economics had that report about 20 million plus jobs maybe lost to automation by 2030. So it's very important that we have this conversation. I agree that Democrats should be focused more on that. We don't really have a jobs gap so much as we have a skills gap. And I think we need to be talking about both jobs, how you increase skill sets, how you bring organized labor to the table to be able to get people back to that economic independence.
Boy, Jen, I must say, Basil's making a really powerful point. I did see that report about robotics and the extent to which they're going to displace manufacturing jobs around the world, actually. Why aren't we hearing, again, from President Trump, for that matter, from the Democrats either, about not just jobs, but the jobs for the next generation?
Well, there's two interesting points, David. The jobs report for June actually showed that manufacturing jobs were up. And remember, in 2016, when he ran and said he was going to bring manufacturing jobs back, people laughed at the guy, like they laughed at him for everything else, the stock market and all the other predictions that didn't come true. But the truth is, President Trump has focused on getting people into more vocational education. They have a number of plans towards that. They have funding towards that. And look, he's out on the campaign trail all the time saying, if you're complaining about college debt, look, there's a percentage of the population that doesn't need to go to college. They need to go to vocational education, and they've put some of those in place with this administration.
But Basil, is either side really talking about education? Because really that's the future. I mean, you wrote your dissertation on this subject.
I did.
I'm not hearing anybody come up with an education plan for the country, Republican or Democrat.
We did for the 30 seconds when Kamala Harris challenged Joe Biden on busing. That's probably the extent of it. And we probably won't really ever get back to it, unfortunately. Typically in presidential campaigns, education ranks like third, fourth, maybe even fifth. But the truth is, it should be ranked a lot higher, particularly for African-American communities. This is our ticket to economic freedom, and unfortunately, it doesn't register that high. We need to change that.
Yeah, really well said. Okay, many thanks to our political panel. Basil Smikle here in New York.